Hi, everybody. Welcome to a special Live with Children and a new series I'm hoping to kick off this week with my co-host, Audrey Greenberg, who, if you don't know who she is, she's obviously CEO and founder of AG Capital Advisors. But the reason her and I are really talking is because she used to be and was the founder and CBO for the Center for Breakthrough Medicine. It's such a long
Good
title, I always
job. Good
forget.
job.
But which has now become SK Pharmteco, and she but now runs her own business, as you can see, with that lovely logo behind it. And look, I don't even have a logo; I just have sports jerseys. And you may notice I have a Phillies jersey there because Audrey is based in Philadelphia, but
Yeah,
also
and going to the game tomorrow, and it's going to
well,
be 80 degrees.
oh,
Be
cool.
nice.
Well, and I put a Marlins jersey there because I like the Marlins. So I put both in rather than just keeping it one-sided as always. Now, the reason we're catching up though is that we decided we'd start a nice little series. Audrey's always keeping up to date with what's going on in the cell and gene space, but also looking at what else is going on within the sector. So we decided that it'd be really great to do an informal look back on some of the main stories which ran this week and give you some links actually to those stories afterwards so you can read more about them after we've had our discussion, and then you can hopefully learn more and contribute to the conversation by adding your comments below. So we're going to call this, we've just been talking about what we should call this, but we've decided to say a look back on cell and gene therapy, but also other stuff we like to talk about. So
That's right.
that's our working title anyway. Hopefully you like it. So Audrey, firstly, it's lovely to see you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thank you so much. I love this idea because we're at such an interesting time, not just in the year and what's happening with the administration and global trade and all the other craziness in the capital markets, but such a fascinating time for medicine and treatments and for patients. So happy to have this, kick it off with you. And I would say the past 2 weeks have been pretty intense. It's a very dynamic time in the market between tariffs and NIH funding cuts, public health debates,
Sure.
massive industrial bets, and certainly the GLP-1 race has been interesting to watch too. But I think what ties it all together is that strategy is colliding with biology and geopolitics is colliding with science. And for CDMOs, innovators, regulators, it's a moment that demands global awareness. So let's get into it with ruthless clarity. And I'm
All right,
excited to
fantastic.
engage. Yeah.
Brilliant. All right, so let's look at the CGT space first of all, though. I know there's other
Okay.
topics you want to talk about, but let's talk about that first of all.
Yeah.
From your perspective, what have been some of the main stories to come out over the last couple of weeks, then, which have caught your eye, and why? So maybe we'll just
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's things that impact CGT. I mean, there are
sure.
interesting stories within CGT, which I think, like, for example, Capital Meeting Cardiology at Lexeo Therapeutics based in New York. That is a great story about gene therapy and what's near and dear to my heart, a disease called Friedreich's ataxia.
Right.
It's a rare disease that is been very difficult. There's been no cure, certainly very limited treatments, and the cardiomyopathy is showing promise now with their new drug and new treatment. So it's not just rare disease anymore. Gene therapy entering cardiology, and simultaneously, by the way, CGT investments are up 30% year over year. 15.2 billion was deployed in the quarter, and 13 of the top 15 pharmas were involved. So
That's quite interesting you say that, given that everyone's talking doom and gloom about the CGT
well,
market.
I mean, I also you have to caveat, like, when you say it's 30% up from like the worst year ever, right? But like it could be down. So it's not down, right? So okay, it's 30% up and it was a very low baseline. So denominator effect, so to speak. But I would say cardiology is where cell and gene therapy stops being boutique and starts becoming systemically relevant.
Sure.
So it's exciting to see some of these wider spread indications being positively impacted by gene therapy.
Do you think, though, just looking at that for a second,
Yeah.
that when you start looking at mainstream, if you want it, for want of a better
Yeah.
word,
Yeah.
modalities, that could hopefully then help to bring the price down for cell and gene therapy to make it more affordable and more accessible?
Yeah. I mean, well, there's a couple things. When you have one vein-to-vein treatment with cell therapy, or you have these rare disease indications, and by the way, a lot of the early approvals were in ocular indications, and when you're going into the eye, you only need so much vector. So anyway, when you have systemic problems and you need a ton of vector, hopefully that's changing over time too, with better tropism and everything else and higher yields. But with economies of scale, as with anything, whether you're making a widget or a gene therapy, the more you make, the cheaper it gets. And so I think with the wider spread indications, regardless of any efficiencies that we'll see in the manufacturing process or better capsid design, you're going to see the cost come down just because of scale.
Right. Okay. And
Yeah.
what were some of the other stories then which caught your eye?
Well, I love the GLP stories. I mean, this thing is so fascinating. It's like the bright spot right now in the biopharmaceutical industry. And by the way, it's not just a vanity drug. It's something that actually has positive implications to human health. So whether it's heart disease or diabetes and whatnot. But right now, it's obviously something that needs to be injected, and it's very expensive and hard to maintain because of temperature control, et cetera, et cetera. So I love the new news about the small molecule aspect of GLP-1s, and you've got Novo and Pfizer. There's such a contrast. Pfizer sort of dropped out of the oral GLP-1 race, and then you've got Novo showing positive data in phase 3. So we have a proof path that's viable for small molecule, which makes it more accessible, less expensive, and hopefully impacts global human health to a positive way, so that we're lowering the cost of some of these things that happen because of obesity. And I think that, we're going to see a reshape in capital flows and CDMO priorities because of all of this. If you don't need the cold chain and you don't need the biologic component or the peptide component, it just makes things easier. And it forces investors to stop backing science experiments without a path to scale, which I love that story too.
And I'll just add to that story actually, because there was a story which came out today as about Lilly
Yeah.
and having like a needle-free treatment as well
Oh, very
within that
interesting.
space. And so I'll share that link because I'm not an expert to talk about it thoroughly, but I'll share the link because there's a story that Lilly have got some great results to rival Ozempic, but in a needle-free version.
Very interesting. I love the pharma evolution story, like following this. And, you see Novo and Lilly climbing the mountain, Pfizer turning back. And by the way, it's not failure, it's just filtration. And it's not fun to watch, but interesting just to see success rates and how a drug evolves over its life cycle.
Sure. Okay, so that was one of the other big stories. But what other stories caught your eye, and what else would you like to talk about?
Well, we got to talk about tariffs. It impacts everyone. I know it's a US based story, but it impacts global trade.
Well, 100%. It is a US. It's led from the US, but it's impacting everyone globally.
Right. And
So
so the tariff thing was announced a couple weeks ago, and then he pulled it back. But all the pharmaceutical companies were watching, when is it gonna hit us? And so yesterday, I think earlier this week, Trump announced a Section 232 investigation, which you probably aren't familiar with, but it's basically things like products that impact national security. It doesn't have to be pharmaceuticals. It can be chips. It can be other things. Steel, it happened in the past. And so the U.S. imposes tariffs on those things that are threatened by national security. And they used it before, like I said, for semiconductors, aluminum, steel, and now it's pharma. It could lead to, I think he said, 10 to 25% tariffs on APIs, drug substances, and even CGT inputs. So it's great if your drug is made here. People think they're immune to it, but then guess what? Your bioreactor bags, your sterile tubing, your reagents, whatever things, the raw materials, the consumables, and the equipment that go into the manufacture of these drugs is a huge cost and part of that. And so that ultimately, by the way, does the CDMO itself care? The CDMO passes on the cost to the pharmaceutical and biotech passes on the cost to the insurer then passes on the cost to the employer, who passes on the cost to the customer. So it's ultimately just a tax on the middle class, which is unfortunate. And it's not protectionism, unfortunately. It's a manufacturing shockwave, and you can't fix global trade by causing a border wall. And it's just really unfortunate. And ultimately, we all pay the price.
right. Well, it's a very interesting point that you brought up, and it's quite scary because I think it's just the unpredictability again. Because a lot of people I've spoken to about tariffs have said they understand why necessarily you might need them, but it's actually the constant changing of what is going to happen.
Yeah.
and the lack of sort of clarity
Yeah.
as to what the future is going to hold. And that's
Yeah.
because it's hard to plan, isn't it? I mean, when particularly, I mean, forgetting about tariffs, but the onshoring argument that's going on now, not even an argument, that the process now to try and get more facilities built within the US is not,
Yeah.
and a lot of people said, well, that sounds fantastic, but it's not something that happens overnight. It takes years to build facilities with massive investment. And will the strategy change within 6 months, 12
Yeah.
months, a year? Who
Yeah.
knows?
Yeah.
That's the thing.
People hate uncertainty. I mean, investors in particular hate it. I mean, some people love volatility and trade and arbitrage just off the vol. But honestly, for investors and most investors that are in it for the medium to the long term, uncertainty creates people sitting on the sidelines. It's like a car wreck when you're driving down the freeway. You got everybody stops and looks. They're not taking action. And by the way, I have firsthand knowledge of, you mentioned, how long it takes to build a facility. We
Yeah,
built one of the largest facilities in the world for cell and gene. By the time you decide where you want to locate, you find the location, you get all the zoning and approvals and design, and it takes 7 years and costs billions and billions of dollars to get these sites online. I would say the recent announcements by Novartis, I think, announced something, Eli Lilly, but because of the geopolitical pressures, you have 23 billion that Novartis announced in 7 US sites, and then Lilly is doing 27 billion across 4 production facilities, and over 50 billion has been invested since 2020. So I think the industrial strategy is in motion, but like you said, it takes years and years for the facility to come online. And you talk to folks, by the way, that aren't necessarily doing this, and they're finding ways. There's people that talk about using AI to determine sort of where to set up a site or how to do a trade route so that you can avoid tariffs. I mean, people are doing some serious research on easily moving manufacturing sites out of China and to other locations, and there's ways to put warehouses in place. And so there's smart people sort of figuring out workarounds and loopholes, just like they do with tax strategy.
yeah. And I suppose there's a boon for those who can create great modular facilities very, very quickly as well.
That's very good point. That is an excellent, excellent point. But you still need all the utilities and the infrastructure,
Yeah, yeah,
water, power. And if it's a manufacturing site, you need redundancy in terms of generators or dual grid electrical, all the things that a pharmaceutical manufacturing plant requires.
right. Yeah, well, very, very true. Now, I know you also wanted to talk about a recent FDA announcement about testing.
Uh, oh, yes, I do. So animal testing, something
It's
near and dear to my.
good thing we talked about this before we started
Yeah,
this
yeah. Well, I
conversation.
had two things that I wanted to talk about in terms of the Trump
Oh, well,
2.
no, we'll carry the second. What's the second
Yeah.
point you'd like to talk about? Sorry.
Well, no, let's talk. I want to talk about animal testing, but I also want to talk about the NIH funding cuts,
Yeah,
and just the domino effect of that.
yeah,
So first of all, HHS is being impacted by tremendous cuts within the FDA. So Peter Marks and others have left the
yeah,
organization, which impacts sort of the speed to which the FDA responds and their understanding of your legacy knowledge that's lost when people leave, and the administrative aspect of getting drugs through the pipeline and being able to leverage the bandwidth of the FDA. So anyway, that's a huge loss, is Peter Marks' departure and others. But then the NIH funding cuts are a real problem, because you have a 15%, not only do you have a 15% cap on overhead with regard to the NIH, but all of the grants are now frozen. So people aren't getting funded, which may be
yeah,
fine for Harvard and Penn and some of these universities with large endowments. But for the small R&D research institutions and smaller academic medical centers, it can be quite crushing in terms of funding. And it's sad for them, but impacts all of us, because this is the pipeline, right? You can't take part of the, you take a couple of years away, we feel the pain today in terms of any outsourcing, but you also feel the pain years to come, because that limits the number of drugs sort of moving its way through. So it's really unfortunate.
yeah. Well, I'll give you an example of that as well, because obviously it was announced in January while I was in San Diego for SLAS, which is a lab automation show, and they had a lot of speakers scheduled on their program from NIH to actually speak. And
Interesting.
literally overnight, the show started. I can't remember on a Monday or a Sunday. They had to start filling slots because people were told there and then they could not get on a plane. They were not allowed to spend any budget and attend conferences they'd already been booked for. So
So
that had an
interesting.
immediate impact, and they had to fill those speaker slots for that. And also, when you start talking to the instrument manufacturers and people who work with with the labs which have been funded by the NIH, you suddenly say, well, actually, will they still have the budget to actually buy our instrumentation or products for the labs to carry out the work that they would normally do because they were in discussions with them? That all gets frozen as well. So there is a immediate trickle down effect when these budgets get cut uh, for a lot of companies within that whole ecosystem in relation to life science and pharma.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate. Tell them to give me a call. I'm happy to fill the speaker spots.
I'm sure you
Anyway, animal testing. Let's talk animal testing.
yeah, let's do
So
that.
I think there's a like this is a little bit of a quiet revolution occurring in clinical development, right? You've got the FDA phasing out mandatory animal testing in favor of these very interesting new technologies, which are all coming to favor right now. These, AI, organ on a trip, other preclinical technologies. And ultimately, it's faster treatments for patients because you're moving through more quickly. It's better safety modeling and lower costs. So it's relevant for cell and gene therapy and precision medicine, although not immediately applicable. If we can find a way to reduce the need for animal models, which ultimately are not necessarily good indicators of how these products impact human beings, all the better for it.
Yeah, and I would do a little plug here because I have done a podcast all about organoids and spheroids. So if you like to learn more, then check out Organoids and a Large Portion of Chips podcast. It's by the WRC community, and I host that actually with a couple of other guests who are more knowledgeable than I am. In fact, I'm not knowledgeable at all, but they are knowledgeable about organoids and spheroids, and I'll put that link in next if you'd like to learn more about that as well. So yeah, that is an interesting area as well, because again, that has impacts on a lot of the companies working in that space, providing services within there. But the smart ones I know have already been thinking ahead and been offering alternatives or developing organoids. I mean, if you look at endotoxin testing, the companies in that space have been gradually, while still offering tests which use horseshoe crabs, they are now offering pyrogen testing as well, and so that because they've realized that the trend has been moving away from using animals.
I mean, there's some areas where you can't really get away from it,
No,
unfortunately, but yeah, it's good to see that we're evolving in the right direction.
fantastic. Now, any other topics you'd like to talk about?
Well, I want to actually ask you. I saw your post this week and heard the news through some colleagues that you were at meeting on the Mesa, or excuse me, meeting on the Med in
Yeah,
Rome, even better. And this is the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine's, flagship event. And so I'm so sad that I didn't get a chance to go. I actually, full disclosure, I serve on the board of this incredible organization that does amazing thing for patients and advocacy. But I'd love to hear how it was firsthand knowledge and what was it like to be in Rome and what the vibe and energy was like, given that it's a cell and gene therapy focused conference.
I think the vibe is that it was an interesting conference for me because I haven't been for a couple of years. So the last time I went was when it was in Barcelona.
Oh,
Um,
I didn't know you had gone before. Oh,
I
that's
have
interesting.
been before,
Oh,
yeah, actually, yeah,
oh,
but it's been a
interesting.
while though. So
Okay.
the hotel was amazing, it has to be said, and please check out my post from the event if you want to see what it was like. Um, they've got a lovely fountain outside with dolphins. It looks fantastic. But but actually, they had some great speakers there. I think overall, I mean, the numbers, which may be a reflection of the market at the moment, were down slightly on the year before, and you can't
Yeah.
hide that fact. Having said that, there were still over 500 people who attended the event
Nice.
this year, so it had a decent number of, and a real mixture of obviously developers, people who are looking for funding, and also solution providers as well
And
as.
investors. I think they had a lot of investors.
They had a few investors
Yeah.
there. I even had a couple of meetings with some investors, not for my business, I hasten to add, but just to learn about what they were doing. Um, but I think overall the feeling is that people accept that it is a very difficult market at the moment for funding. However, there is some great technology being worked on at the moment by many, many people, and overall the feeling is, I think, that you just have to ride the wave,
Yeah.
because that is how the cell and gene market is, unfortunately, where it contracts and expands, contracts and expands, and things will hopefully start to get better in terms of the funding situation because the need is out there.
Do you
And the
feel like
third,
people are focused more on science or commercialization?
I think there is a degree that there is already a lot of great science out there,
Yeah.
but the challenge is, from an investor point of view, and I think maybe we've talked about this in the past as well, but is to how do you get that science to the commercial phase? And there was
Yeah.
and you know, in the meetings I had with people, when I spoke to a couple of people who are developing therapies, as well as people who are developing new instrumentation in that space, I mean,
Mm.
the challenge is to be able to show that they are able to commercialize that product, you know, in the right way. And obviously that depends on data as well. Both if you're providing a therapy, you've got to get it to clinical trial and show that it actually works, and so on. But actually, what the fundamental theme came through to me was a lot of people who've got these companies need to start thinking about commercialization earlier.
And
And so,
reimbursement.
and reimbursement, yeah, reimbursement
Yeah.
as well, both, you know, but they have
Yeah.
to start thinking about how are we going to commercialize it and how can we make sure that it's affordable. And
Yeah.
so that is the challenge for everyone in this space now, and I think everybody realizes that because of the difficulty of getting people to invest in them at the moment. But also I think it comes down to them then thinking about those things a lot sooner in the development of what they're doing, whether it's the therapy itself or whether it's the instrumentation, is saying, right, okay, whatever we plan, we have to think about how are we going to get it to that point and how we can actually then make it affordable to the end user. And actually, when you talk to the instrumentation companies, a lot of the instruments which have been developed are about helping to reduce cost, reduce time, and be more sustainable. And you know, so those
Yeah.
the
The sustainability thing is interesting too. That's true.
yeah, and the instrumentation companies who are there and developing new instruments. And I spoke to a couple of people who have got relatively new businesses. Uh, you know, they started out as PhD students doing their products and develop this, as a lot of businesses do start out. Um, they actually understand that, and then they know that they have to now try and get data, but the instruments they're creating are for that very reason, to say, look, when I ask people, look, this is great, but why should people use this rather than what's already in the market? Well, I'll tell you why, because it's 10 times faster, it reduces time for the project, everything. They just start highlighting all the key benefits that it will bring in terms of the whole manufacturing process.
Yeah, and you have to be prepared to answer questions about your competitors and what your value differential, because if they get
100%.
night, yeah. That's one thing that's a competitive market landscape is sometimes what people miss. Why are you better?
Yeah, well, it's a fundamental question that everyone should know, and if you don't
Yeah.
know that, then why are you doing it? You know, and that is that. You know, I'm not trying to be like a, I'm not an investor, but you know, I watched enough Shark Tank and Dragon's Den, and the fundamental and the fundamental question is, it's great to be, you know, create something fantastic and you know, innovative and so on, but ultimately, it, there are, as you said, lots and lots of solutions out there in lots of segments that people can use. Why do they switch from what they currently use to use your product or therapy? You need to have a very strong argument as to why that should be the case. And it was interesting talking. Most of the people I spoke to, I would say one or two maybe didn't. I wouldn't name who they are, but there were the one or two companies. I still thought they were talking more about theory, and in their own mind they thought it was the greatest thing since sliced bread. Whereas others got it and said, well, no, actually, we know exactly why we're doing this. We know why it's better than what's already out there market. But we understand as well we need to get the data to prove that, and some have already got that data, so they're ready to get to that point of commercialization. Whereas others understand, no, we're doing the testing now to make sure that we can prove it. So that
Yeah.
was really interesting as well.
And speaking of data, I know you spend a lot of time looking at the data on your audience. I'd be interested to hear in this realm, like what stories stick with your audience, because that might be relevant to CGT companies tapping into some of that. I mean, how do you balance hype versus hope? And what do you think, what stories in CGT do you think stick?
I think they stick if you've got some real data to
Yeah,
demonstrate that the therapy that they are shouting about actually works. I think,
right.
like you said, there's a lot of hype in this particular space, and you know, and because everybody wants it to work, and everybody has a lot of people have invested a lot of money in this space as well, so they need
Yeah,
it to work as well. So there is some, you know, so self-fulfilling prophecy that people want to say, well, like, this is so fantastic, so everyone keeps investing in it. But I think it's just proving data because people want to see real data. They want to see scientific papers proving what you're saying about that particular therapy.
Yeah.
Because people are looking for positive stories in this space. So I think it's really good. And overall, I have to say that the overall feeling, despite, when you would have thought going to a Cell and Gene event, given all the sort of doom and gloom which has been in the press
Right.
lately, it was
Good
still
point.
it was a very positive event. Everyone was very positive about they realize that it's a tough market. No one can dispute it isn't a tough market, but there are opportunities if you know what you're talking about and create a product which people actually need. And that's the thing. You need to be quite clear in what you're trying to do and what you're trying to offer.
Yeah, I think I think we're at a moment where the science is advancing faster than policy and manufacturing. And manufacturing now needs to be part of strategy and credibility for both institutions and companies. Everything's changing. And I think whether you're in Boston or Basel or Birmingham for that matter, this spring is the turning point. So we're all blessed to be going through this time and trying to take advantage of market opportunity. But it's so fun to be talking about it with you. Thank you for having me. It's always fun to have these good
Well, Audrey, it's
conversations.
great to do that. And I look forward to hopefully catching up with you next week and we'll see what's happened in the cell and gene space and pharma and life science for you.
It's
Viewers,
moving fast. We got to keep up.
yeah, exactly. Who knows? The tariffs might have changed again by next week.
Yeah, that's true.
So, viewers, I hope you found that interesting. If you've got any comments based on what we talked about this week, feel free to share them. Also, if you saw any great stories out there in this space that you think people should know about, feel free to put them in the comments below. We'd love to hear any stories that you think people should know more about. But also, I will flag up, if you're in this space, you already know. But if you don't know, ISCT is coming up in New Orleans, which is the International Cell. You tell me what it is again.
International Society for Cell and Gene
I always,
Therapy.
yeah,
And it's back
ISCT.
to back with the American Society of Cell and Gene Therapy. So they're both in New Orleans back to back. I know somebody told me yesterday she's going for 10 days straight. She's not flying back.
Whereas I will be splitting up with the PEGs Boston in between. So
Oh,
I will
PEGs. What does PEG stand for?
protein engineering. I can't remember. It must be genetics. I think it must
Engineering
be,
and genetics. Yeah.
yeah, it must be genetics. Yeah, and that we're running in Boston, overlapping a little bit with ASGCT. So I hope to go to all three during my 10-day trip, and also hopefully
Protein and Antibody Engineering
I'm
Summit. We
glad you
both
got.
had.
You know what? CHI who run that event will really have a go at me now because I can't even get it right, and I've even got a press pass to go. Never mind. And also,
Hashtag know your acronyms.
yeah, I should. I'm terrible at them. And also, Swiss Biotech Week is happening in the first week in May as well. So if you're in
Oh.
Basel, make sure to attend that. That's going to be a great event as well. Hopefully, I can get to go to that before I get to New Orleans. We'll see. But Audrey, it's lovely to see you. Have a great week. Have a great Easter. I know all the kids are home from school now, so you go and spend your time with them and have a great time. And
Thank
hopefully,
you.
we'll catch up around this time next week to learn out how your week's gone.
And don't forget about Passover.
Yeah, exactly. Well, happy Passover to everybody
Thank you.
celebrating as well. All right.
Thank you so much.